Hello everyone, I'm Isaiah Cartwright, and we're going to be talking about the Guardian today. So I think one of the biggest things to start in on talking about the Guardian is really to talk about the class-specific skills and how that kind of relates to the way you're going to build your character. Really the first big one is you kind of have Virtue of Justice, and what this does is it makes, it kind of has a passive bonus. All of your Guardian abilities have a passive and an active bonus, much kind of like signets in the game. The passive bonus for Virtue of Justice will every few attacks burn your enemy, which can be really important when loading up your traits and how you're going to interact with those. And the active will make it so that you and all your allies, your next attack automatically burns. Virtue of Resolve, this thing will constantly give you health regeneration every few seconds, and when you activate it, it will give a heal to you and all of your allies. And the Virtue of Courage basically gives you Aegis, which is kind of the boon that the Guardian uses the most. And Aegis will block the next attack, and so Virtue of Courage's passive kind of gives you that every 40 seconds. And when you activate it, it'll automatically give it to you. And it's at instant speed, which is really important because you can do a lot of different things with it, where like you're stunned, you can throw up Aegis or different things like that. And so those are really important to kind of think about the way when you're building your character. One of the things that I find with the Guardian is he has a little bit less access to conditions, condition damage conditions than other classes, but has the most access to burning. This really comes back in tie when you're looking at your different types of gear that you're going to go. I really don't ever heavily go into condition damage. I know there's some builds out there, but I find that it's hard to get enough damage out of it to go all in to condition damage. So I find a little bit of splashing condition damage can bring the amount of burning that you're kind of doing all over, bring up your damage a little bit, but really focusing on burn duration can really synergize with your traits and other things. So when it comes to gear, I really think DPS is really strong on the Guardian, so I like to go a lot of Berserker gear and Berserker jewelry. And this makes it, because you have Aegis always up, you also get a lot of access to blinds and skills that do blind. You can really blind a lot with the Guardian. And the way that blind synergizes with Aegis stops the enemies from hitting you, and then when they don't have blind, it hits Aegis, so the two don't overlap, and so it can really allow you to miss a lot of attacks. And so when you go all in on like a Berserker build, you still feel pretty durable, but it's a lot more active durability that requires you to use your skills a lot in order to do. And so I find kind of default, I like just running really heavy Berserkers type of gear. If I want to try to do a different type of build, not be as much DPS focused, and you can get a little bit more tanky, I like to go with Knights for tankiness, but also sometimes Soldiers is really nice. The Guardian by nature has a lot less health, and that can sometimes get you into trouble. And so Soldiers, while you'll get a less crit damage, percent out of it, and you'll do a little bit less damage, that vitality can really kick in to bring your vitality up a lot. And so at first I'm going to talk a little bit more about DPS builds and how you kind of want to set those up. When I'm really running my raw kind of basic for DPS builds is I like Sword Focus and Greatsword are kind of the two weapons that I like to focus on a lot, because Sword has a lot of really high just raw DPS in its 1 ability and its 3 ability, and those can be just really put you out a lot of good damage. Greatsword also has a lot of really good DPS. The 2 skill can really get a lot to a target up close, and I really like pulling enemies in because it kind of naturally groups them up for your AoEs. And so those two really work together. The Focus offhand provides you with a little bit more blinds, and like I said earlier, that's the thing when you're running a heavy DPS build that kind of helps you keep going and not die as much. And it has Shield of Wrath, which is another block like Aegis is, and after it takes a few blocks then it explodes. There's kind of a lot of fun here. It does quite a bit of damage, and so you can really get a lot of burst out of it with some good timing. And it's also a blast finisher, and so you can use that blast finisher to either trigger your light fields or or like I like to run as a fire field, and you can get extra might and things like that. And so one of the key things to me, especially in PvE when you're trying to really maximize your DPS trait-wise, is in the Radiance line. I really like the Justice is Blind minor trait combined with Renewing Justice trait. What it means is your F1 ability will recharge every time you kill something. And so you kind of stack up the effectiveness of this, and then things are dying a lot, and you're killing a lot in PvE. And so what happens is you start to get a lot of blindness being thrown around, and you get to build your might up, and you get retaliation, so when things do get through, and you get to keep very, very close, if not all the time, burning on your enemy. And so those combined can really add to just overall damage output that you're putting out. And then when you combine that up with the 25 in the Radiance line, where you're getting 10% extra damage with foes with conditions, the fact that you kind of almost always have burning up on your enemy and blindness and those types of things really makes it adds up the damage. Which is where I like to go into the Zeal line, Fiery Wrath, another damage increase. You'll kind of see a lot of the traits and ways that I think is good to spec the Guardian is to really just stack up a lot of these damage bonuses, because it can turn your basic attacks and your raw damage just into really high numbers. And then, you also get a lot of just vulnerability through the different things that you're doing. And there's a couple traits you can take where you will give vulnerability every time you blind. And so then that stacks up once again, makes that F1 skill really powerful. And then once again, just more damage. Look for deal damage with your greatsword, deal damage with your sword, those types of things that stack up. When I go into the Virtues line, some of the nice damage add you get is the 25. You tend to have a lot of boons on you. Like when you just kind of cycle these, you can see you'll have lots of boons just on you from all the different skills you're using. And usually it's pretty easy to have 5 boons on you, and so you get a solid damage boost out of this. There's ways that you can spec these. The current one I have is just increasing the recharge. I really like the Purging Flame skill. Not only does it keep the burning on the foes to get that extra damage rolling, it's removing conditions and giving you a fire field to work on. And so really reducing its recharge and duration can make that thing be up a lot more and give you a lot more uptime. You can go the Unscathed Contender with this, which gives you basically a 20% damage boost, which is really big while you have Aegis up. And that can make it so you can do a whole lot of damage, especially when you're blinding your foes and the blind is staying on them, so it's not popping your Aegis. And so you can really kind of get a really huge damage add all throughout those. But you can kind of bounce between some different variations. That one's a little bit more damage focused. And then the 9 trait here on Virtues, it just makes the number 2 a little bit more effective. It removes conditions also when you're going, which because you have the low health and you're really relying on your regeneration to keep you going and your kind of blocks, the condition damage gets through all of that. It gets through all the extra armor that you have. It really pushes you on your low health. And so as a Guardian, I think you got to really pay attention to conditions and try to cleanse them. You have a lot of access to cleansing, and so I like to add this because it gives me more synergy. Elite-wise, I really like Renewing Focus. Not only does it give you an invulnerability, buys you extra time for you to get your recharges back, but you can kind of pop all 3 of your abilities right before using it. You can actually pop them while you're in the channel to it and get them right back, which really can get you an extra bit of healing, can get you extra Aegis and protection. You can kind of do them back to back if you need extra time. And so there's really nice synergy between those two. That also followed up with Shelter. You can also get more invulnerability, and it can really allow you, when you get low health, you can focus on all these kind of invulnerabilities, your regen, those blinds, and kind of get back into the fray easily. And so those things can become really powerful. And so this is kind of like the basic DPS build that I like to run with the Berserker gears. There's a couple other things that I think you can take. There's the Great Sword Always Healing You trait whenever you're swinging. That one's really fun to take. You can dabble a little bit into Valor and pick up a couple extra traits to get you a little bit of extra damage. But normally I don't. I like I know a lot of people really like to go into Valor and Honor, but I find that the traits that I get out of these other things and the synergy that I get with my damage build, I play a lot. It's a lot more interesting and a lot more higher damage output. And that said, if you do want to be a little bit more tanky, you know, there's some different routes to go. For rune sets, you know, Divinity, really, really strong. I think Scholar is especially strong on the Guardian. You know, not only does it give you extra damage bonuses, which are kind of already stacking damage adds everywhere, it does it over 90% health. And because of all that kind of natural regeneration, the kind of like blocks and blinds and things like that that you can really stack up, you can really, for a pretty good amount of time, stay at 90% health, which allows you to kind of blast through a lot of enemies and can really keep that damage add up front. So I think it's a really solid. I know it's really expensive. You know, both of these runes are really expensive. And so, you know, if you can't afford some of those things, always the ruby orbs and the beryl orbs, really solid starting places until you can afford some of these more expensive runes. And so on to kind of a more tanky type of Guardian. You know, like I was saying before, you kind of have knights and soldiers. I've actually seen some of other stat combos. You can use the primary vitality version of these things, which is the Sentinel's gear. But it's kind of very similar. It all just depends on kind of if you really want some more health. In those kind of loadouts, excuse me, you can go heavier into Valor and Honor. You know, there's a couple different ways. I kind of like the Shout version a little bit more, which you just dabble a little bit into those ranges, and you can run, you know, I like to run basically hold the line and retreat. They're both kind of very defensive shouts. And then sometimes I like to run the Signet Judgment. It basically reduces the incoming damage by 10%. So all those kind of things stacking on top of each other gives you a lot more defense. The higher toughness from the Knight's gear, this can really bolster the total amount of toughness you get. But you kind of, because you lost a couple of those abilities to get conditions off, I'll kind of roll around, and I usually like to run Soldier's gear. You know, you're running multiple shouts. You can kind of pick up the shout trait. I always forget which one it is. Here you go. Oh, sorry, wrong line. You get your shout trait and reduces your shouts, and that can be really important to spamming those things a lot and getting you the condition removal that you need. And they naturally have a lot of good defense built into their states. The other kind of big way to build the Guardian is if you run a bunch of the meditations in the game. And so the meditations here all kind of have very defensive abilities, whether they're converting conditions or some of them teleport to others and heals. You know, I really like the Contemplation of Purity a lot, you know, kind of my condition argument from earlier, and also Smite condition is really, really fun to use in all of these things. But those different meditations, if you pick up and you go deep into the line, you can pick up the Meditations Heal You trait, and they can actually heal you for quite a bit, and they're fairly already defensive, and so you can kind of keep yourself rolling with your different meditations. You know, if you do run that, you want to basically take your meditations recharge quicker, so that you're kind of always doing them as fast as you can, and to keep yourself up and your healing. But I like the Shout version. You're kind of naturally help allies a lot with, you know, your F1s and things like that, and so I find when you do go that tank build and you're going heavy into Valor and Honor line, there's kind of a couple different flavors. As for weapon-wise, like I said, for DPS, it's really Sword and Focus and Greatsword, but you can also go Smite if you want to do a little bit more, or it's not Smite, sorry, Scepter if you want to get a little bit more range. You know, Smite can do a lot of damage in PvE. When I'm running tank, I usually like to focus more on Hammer. You know, Hammer has a couple different things that are really important. The fact that you can kind of create a ward, and you can do this in a couple different ways. You can kind of ward other people and just block people pathing so that things can't get to them. You can also kind of get some, there's a lot of symbols that go on when you're running Hammer, and just by your basic attack dropping a symbol, so you kind of want to get symbols last longer in your traits, because that really synergizes well with all these different things. The fact that Mighty Blow is a blast finisher is really, really powerful using in your symbols. You can also also kind of use the fire field to give might, or look for water fields that other people are throwing to really add to the overall healing. And so I kind of like just the way that hammer really synergizes when I'm trying to be very defensive in those legs. Staff's also a good way that you can get some of that same effects. It's also got a pathing blocker skill, and it's got some different supports. You can there's a healing power with Empower, and it can really stack up the might really quickly, depending on whether you're trying to really run tanky your own character, or whether you're trying to support other people. Some of these abilities can really come into play. And then there's also always the mace shield if you really want to go all into being really tanky. The knockback on Shield of Absorption can be really fun when trying to resurrect people in World v World, or stop the range attacks from coming in on someone. You can get a lot of really good blocking of projectiles, which I think, when it comes to support or even tank, depending on what you're trying to do, really what type of enemies you run into, you can adapt a little bit. If you're really trying to deal with a lot of projectiles, running shield, running, the reflecting wall, and also you can run the Shield of Avenger. He will drop out another shield that absorbs projectiles, and so you can really stack up a lot of projectile blocking. And so if you're running into an area where there's a lot of ranged combat, you can really mitigate the amount of damage coming in through all of those things kind of synergizing together. And then if you have enemies with really slow hits, even going when you're trying to be tanky, going back to sword and great sword, you can get a lot of those blinds. And once again, F1 really powerful with the ability to get blind on your enemies as much as you want there. And so you can really be more of an active defense, shutting down your enemy and the amount of attacks, no matter which build you're going, if you really pay attention to your skills and the way they interact together. With the tank builds, like I said, Soldier's really good. If I'm running support, I like the way Travelers, it kind of rounds you out in a lot of different ways, but the boon duration here can be really, really strong. You can also just stack raw boon duration, grab 3 sets that are at the 2 set and bump your boon duration up a lot, and run with that. I don't really like going into the Altruism rune set, which is usually a really good support skill, mainly because the Guardian's heals have really long recharges to them, and so that makes it so that the 10-second cooldown on those healing trigger things isn't as effective for the Guardian, so I try to stay away from that stuff. For Sigils, really when you're looking at trying to maximize damage and you're really going in the all damage add type of direction, I like to get Sigil of Force. It's raw, easy, powerful damage going up. If I'm going to go into some on kills, I'll either lean heavier on the precision or on bloodlust, or depending on what I need a little bit more. You can also run the sword. Always, it's like right hand strength. Sword always gets you 15% extra critical. If you do that, focusing a little bit more on bloodlust can be really good if you want to go a little bit deeper in line and maybe less in virtues for your damage build. And doing that, then maybe I'll run bloodlust and just try to get the raw power up to maximize all those damage adds that I'm stacking on top of each other. If you're running dungeons or in an area where nighttime is set, the 10% extra from night is just really powerful, and so those things can all stack together, and you can see really focus a lot on just raw damage stacking when you're running the damage builds. For tanking and those different routes, there's some new runes, like you can pick up the sigil that whenever you swap weapons, you'll heal. That can help a little bit. There's always the sigil of battle, which can bring up the different, get your might stacks up, or allow that tankiness to turn back into damage in different ways. And support, very similar to the way you set up tanky builds. I think Guardian support builds and Guardian tanky builds are very, very similar. That's why I like to focus a little bit more on the shouts, because it can be a little more universal. If I am running support, I do like to, there's boon duration. There's not this is kind of the only boon duration food that we have currently. And so if you're really trying to maximize boon duration, if you didn't go heavy into doing stacking boon duration in your runes, sometimes I can run some food and get a little extra boon duration, which can really help. If I'm running damage, I really like the 10% critical damage increase from the food here. I kind of like the power version a little bit better than the precision version, but they really can be expensive, so kind of go with what you can afford on those things. And then for the utility buff, I usually like to run sharpening stones. I think when you have a lot of the damage adds really stacked up on each other, you can maximize your total damage by just getting your power really high up there. And so those can be really powerful. Like I said, I don't really usually go much condition duration or condition damage. Sometimes you'll pick up a little bit in your kind of all stat type of gear, and you get a decent amount going the Radiance line, which is kind of one of my favorite lines in the way the Guardian kind of lays out. And so those things can get you some extra damage here and there. But I usually don't focus it too much on the food. 40% duration, from your pizza, it does add up on some burning damage, but I'd much rather just get the raw power. I think it gets you a lot more damage in the end. Like I said, with running the heavier vitality here, you can also run Rune of Exuberance, which I think ends up just kind of being a different way to get you a little bit more all stats, but it can be a cheaper way to get you kind of some of that feel in putting those characters together. And so those are some of the bigger layouts and builds that I like to run with Guardian. And like I said, I think the big thing to focus on a bunch here is really the fact that you have a lot of defense with your Aegis and your blinds, and focus a little bit more on your raw damage when you're doing that stuff. And so that's the Guardian, and thank you very much.